Kurt Signetti and Indiana football are trending up in the college football playoff, but the question becomes, how high can they go?
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. It is the Locked On Hoosiers podcast. I'm your man, Jacob Goins. Appreciate you being here, making this your first listen each and every day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, thank you so much for being here, making this your first listen or your first watch every single day, and really appreciate all of my everydayers coming back for every single day. And if you're new here, if you're just now discovering us on YouTube or on the audio side, thank you so much for being here. Hope that you really do enjoy this. Indiana basketball moves up to 16th in the AP poll. We'll talk about that with their game against South Carolina coming up this weekend. Plus, for Indiana football, is the season already a success? No matter how the rest of this thing plays out, is it already been a success in your eyes? But we do care about how the rest of the season plays out with a new college football playoff ranking coming out tonight, a path to the playoff that Indiana has, and the question becomes, how high can we go? New playoff rankings come out on Tuesday. That is tonight as this episode comes out for you. And you saw the newest AP poll, right? The newest AP poll came out, and Indiana was up to 5 in the country, which that in itself, I think, needs to be stated. I think that needs to be highlighted. I think that needs to be celebrated, really, because this is historic for Indiana football. I mean, we're talking about a top 5, top 6 team in the country, depending on which rankings that you look at. And so you got to remember, right, the AP poll is what we use all the way up to basically November, right? End of October and early November until we get the college football playoff rankings out. And so you're talking about a top 5 Indiana team. But where will we be in the college football playoff rankings tonight? I think we're a top 5 team. I would like to believe that you think Indiana is a top 5 team. And I think there's a lot of people in the country that believe this is a top 5 Hoosiers team as well, right? You have a couple of teams ahead of us that lost this weekend, Georgia and Miami. Both of those teams lost. Both of those teams will fall below us. And so you'll have Oregon at 1. You'll have Ohio State 2. More than likely Texas at 3. Penn State at 4. And then the question becomes, will they put Tennessee at 5 and Indiana at 6? Or will they allow us to jump somebody and be inside that top 5? Again, I think we're good enough for it. I think we're undefeated. Actually, I know we're undefeated, and I think that that should be rewarded. At this point in the college football season, I don't care how difficult or easy or whatever you want to say about anybody's schedule. If you're undefeated, you've earned it. You've deserved it. And Indiana and Oregon are 2 of the only unbeatens, or 2 of some of the very few unbeatens. BYU is in that category as well. Army is in that category as well. I mean, there's just very few undefeated teams in college football. And with as hard as it is nowadays, I think that that should be rewarded. So will we be top 5? My guess is probably not. My guess is that we're going to be number 6 in the college football playoff rankings tonight. But guess what? It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because you have one game to win for your entire season. We talked about this yesterday, and we'll continue to talk about this all the way up to next Saturday, Indiana and Ohio State. You're going to have possibly a top 5 showdown in Columbus. Tennessee, a team ahead of you, they play at Georgia coming up this weekend. If Tennessee loses that game, which I expect that they will, Indiana will then move up, right? As we continue to trend up, asking how high can we go? I think we'll move into that top 5. So if it's not tonight, there's a good chance it'll be next week for us Indiana Hoosiers. And then you set up one of the biggest games of the year, biggest game in Indiana football history, that's for sure, in Columbus, in the shoe. That game has been announced. It will be a big noon kickoff game. It'll be 12 Eastern, 11 Central time. I know that there were a lot of Ohio State fans who were not overly pleased with that result, or I guess with that decision, right? They wanted this to be a night game. They wanted it to be as hyped up as possible. But guess what? TV doesn't really care. They want to make sure that everybody in the country has a chance to watch Ohio State and Indiana. And so, look, for us, not to go down this road too much right now, we'll get to it when we get closer to the game, but that benefits us. That benefits Indiana. I've always said the road team benefits with early kickoffs. And I think Indiana can walk in there and try to take advantage of that. And that gets into our path to the playoff conversation, right? Because how does Indiana get to the playoff? The easy answer is win out. Win your games. Beat Ohio State. Beat Purdue. I don't want people to overlook that. All right, beat Purdue and then make it to the Big Ten championship game and take down, which is probably going to be the Oregon Ducks. That's your easiest path. Well, I guess that's the most clear path to the college football playoff. Win your games and you're in. Now, a lot of the experts believe that Indiana, if we beat Ohio State, beat Purdue, and fall short in the Big Ten championship game, that we would still be in the college football playoff. I would like to think that too, but I just don't have confidence in the playoff committee because of how they've operated in the past, the fact that they can make decisions behind closed doors and nobody can hold them accountable. I don't trust them, so we'll just have to wait and see. There are also experts that believe even with a loss to Ohio State, but a win over Purdue and not making the Big Ten championship game, that Indiana would have a chance to still make it. I'm not as confident, just me personally, I'm not as confident in that as some people may be, because at that point, you kind of ask yourself, okay, what has Indiana done compared to some of these other teams who have at least a big win? And yes, only having one loss in a season is unbelievable, but it's impossible to ignore the strength of schedule here if we don't beat Ohio State. I think we're good enough to be in the playoffs regardless. That's not the concern at all. I think we're very much capable of making the playoff and winning a game or two in the college football playoff, but it's not about that. It's about who can they get in, who are the best teams, right? Who has the best chance to have the best game? Who's going to make us the most money on ESPN? That's what the playoff is about. Don't fool yourselves. Don't get ahead of yourselves here. Don't be confused. Don't be fooled here. It's not about getting the most deserving teams. It's about getting the quote best teams who's going to make the best games for best money on TV. And so Indiana needs to take it out of their hands, leave no doubt, and just win your games. And if you do that, you're going to be in the college football playoffs. Well, coming up on Locked On Hoosiers, even if we don't make the college football playoff, or even if we do, to this point in the season, middle of November, as we hit the bye week, I ask you this question. Is the season already a success for Indiana football? We'll talk about that coming up next on Locked On Hoosiers. Today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers is brought to you by Roy. Locked On Hoosiers fans, listen up. You need to download the Roy app. And for all Indiana fans, you need to download the Roy app. You have heard us talk about Roy this season and how they are revolutionizing the NIL industry. Roy allows you, the fan, to have a say in who gets the NIL money. And here's what I absolutely love about Roy. You get your money back if that player transfers, right? So Roy is helping us keep our team intact, and it's actually good for the game long term. So this week, our Roy Player of the Week, right? Our Roy Player of the Week this week for Indiana football. I talked about him yesterday on the show. He just came out of nowhere, had his best game of the year as a receiver, and I really think it helped give Indiana a spark several times. Keyshawn Williams, number 5 on receivers, 6 catches, 70 yards for Indiana. And again, just really gave Indiana a spark when they needed it, where they were having a slow day offensively. You can show support for Keyshawn Williams by depositing a little appreciation onto that player's account. To do that, download the Roy app. You can see what the logo looks like if you're watching on YouTube, or go to joinroy.com. And our player of the week is Keyshawn Williams. And so be sure you can join us as we're going to throw some money into his account on Roy. Every contribution counts. $10, $20, it all adds up, and it's going to help your favorite players stay put. Join me and show some love for Keyshawn Williams. Download the Roy app or go to joinroy.com today. Use the promo code Locked On. Every athlete from every team is there. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for full terms. Roy, support the players and change the game. Welcome back into Locked On Hoosiers. Thank you so much for being here. Shout out to all of my everydayers, those of you that come back each and every day. And for those of you who have just found us, maybe recently, maybe today's your first time here, welcome in to the Locked On Hoosiers podcast, a daily podcast on all things Indiana athletics, covering a lot of football, a lot of basketball right now as crossover season is upon us. So thank you so much for being here. If you're on audio, be sure that you are following us on there. You've got your notifications turned on, whatever platform you may be on. Really do appreciate you being an everydayer on that side of things. And for those of you on YouTube, make sure you're liking the video every time, right? It helps us out, helps us grow. Be sure you comment down below. What is Indiana's best path to the college football playoff? And then be sure, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We're approaching 3,500 subscribers, which is unbelievable for this channel from where we started to where we are now. So thank you so much for being here and supporting this channel. However you do that, it really, really is appreciated. So I pose this question to you and all Indiana fans, and even for those people on the outside looking in, if we happen to have non-Hoosiers fans watching and listening to the show this today, right? Up to this point, Indiana football, 5 in the AP poll, a top 5 team in college football, the 5th ranked team in the AP poll. I expect us to be 6th in the college football playoff rankings that come out tonight, 10-0 for the first time, with 2 games to go. You had College Game Day there for the first time ever on a Saturday. You have Big Noon Kickoff there. You've had all the TV coverage. You've had all the wins. You've had just everything you could possibly imagine in this first year for head coach Curt Cignetti, this new staff, and all the new players that are here, right? And so I pose the question to you. No matter how it plays out, whether Indiana wins their final 2, loses their final 2, splits their final 2, gets to the Big Ten championship, wins it, loses it, makes it to the college football playoff, loses, and doesn't get to the college football playoff, they host a playoff game, whatever the case may be, because all of that is still on the table here. Despite that, is this season already a success in your mind, in your eyes as an Indiana fan, or again, those on the outside? Is this season a success already? Absolutely. I think it is. I think it has to be, right? Now, would we be disappointed if a playoff does not happen for us? Yeah, I think we would be, and rightfully so, which is crazy to think about in itself, right? In its own right, we would be disappointed for Indiana football to not be a playoff team. That has never been said ever in the history of this program. And so we have to appreciate that, and we have to understand where we are and where we've come from. And I think we all can do that here in Bloomington. But it's also okay to push into what this season has been and understand that this has been a really good year. I mean, we're in the midst of the greatest football season we've ever seen in Bloomington. Ever. In the history of this program, and it's not done. But despite that, despite what the future holds, it's impossible to say that it's not already been a success, because let's say, I think the most likely scenario here, according to the numbers, is Indiana, we lose at Ohio State, we beat Purdue, and then we wait on our fate for the college football playoff. And in that case, you're an 11-win team, possibly going to the college football playoffs, and that was just year 1 under Curt Cignetti. That was year 1 under your new head coach and your new regime. You start posing the questions and asking yourselves, man, imagine what we can do in year 2 and year 3 with all the recruiting that's ramped up, with the transfer portal that's running wild, which is a big reason why we're as good as we are. You have to start looking at the bigger picture here and realizing that this guy can make us good and competitive for quite some time. not just 1 year. Well, I don't think this is just a one-hit wonder, right? This isn't some boy band from Europe. This is Indiana football that I think can be around for quite some time as long as Coach Curt Cignetti is here. Had a big episode on that yesterday. Be sure you go check that out. And if that's the case, then you have to look back at year one and say that it's already been a success, because it has been. It absolutely has been. You found your quarterback who could be and could go down as the best quarterback or one of the best quarterbacks that's ever played here, right? Look at the numbers he's got. I think he's got a Heisman campaign still going, does Curtis Rourke. You've pulled in so much talent offensively and defensively from all over the place, and you've got fans bought in. You've got sellouts at Memorial Stadium. You've got ESPN and Fox and everybody who wants to be a part of it. You've got a top 5 matchup coming up next week against Ohio State, where the winner goes to the Big Ten championship game and increases their chances to make a college football playoff. The fact that you even have any of that and have a chance in any of that tells me that this season has been a success, because what else could you have asked for? Nobody predicted 10-0. Nobody predicted a top 5 ranking in the AP poll. Nobody predicted serious college football playoff implications and serious college football playoff chances. Nobody had that. I thought we could have had a good year, right? I thought we could have had a 7-8 win season based off of what I heard and what I saw from head coach Curt Cignetti. But remember, way back in the beginning, we were looking through the schedule, making predictions and breaking it all down. We wrote the Ohio State game off. We didn't even give ourselves a chance in the beginning. And here we are, and we feel like we could take down the New York Giants. I know they're bad, but you get my point. This season has been a success, and there's no doubt about it. And for anybody that says it's not, I'm genuinely curious why. Why would you consider this not a success so far? Don't worry about what happens in the future. I'm not worried about that right now. This particular question is for you through November, the middle of November, through 10 games where the Hoosiers have not lost, and they go into a bye week in preparation for the biggest game in program history. How is that not a success to you? I don't see how. And for those on the outside looking in, how could it not be a success? They've got to be saying to themselves, man, good for Indiana, which is what a lot of people are saying. Good for Indiana. Good for the Hoosiers. What a great story. But it's more than that, because people have started watching us and they're like, wow, this team's actually really good. Now, they watched the struggle against Michigan. Sure. They watched the struggle. That's fine. Who hasn't struggled this year? Has any team just looked dominant, unbeatable this season? Oregon hasn't. Ohio State hasn't. Indiana hasn't. Georgia hasn't. Miami hasn't, right? None of those teams have. So Indiana's just fine. We're right on schedule, man. We're right on pace with everybody else around us in college football. This season has been historic. It's been fun. It's been so much fun to be with this team and cover this team and watch this team do what they've done. And it's already been a huge success. But I promise you, we're not done. With the biggest game in program history coming up next weekend, hopefully a beatdown of Purdue and a trip to Indianapolis up the road for a Big Ten championship and a chance at the college football playoff, the greatest season lives on. And Indiana has everything in front of them to make this the true greatest season in program history. Well, coming up in our final segment on Locked On Hoosiers, we'll flip over to the basketball side of things, where the men got ranked and bumped up a little bit in the AP poll. They now get ready for a pretty solid non-conference game this weekend against the Gamecocks of South Carolina. We'll talk about that in our final segment coming up on Locked On Hoosiers. Today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Huge game coming up on Thursday night for the NFL, so be sure that you get involved with that. Tons of games coming up this Sunday as well. And, of course, Monday Night Football. All of that can be bet on on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Final segment here on Locked On Hoosiers. Appreciate you being here, making this your go-to spot for all things Indiana athletics. If you're looking for your next watch or your next listen, if you're on YouTube, you can watch it. If you're on your audio platform, you can listen to it. Go check out Locked On College Basketball. All right, Isaac and Andy, those two guys do a phenomenal job talking about all things college basketball, newest AP poll, biggest results, upcoming games. They've got everything covered there. So be sure you go and check them out and tell them that I sent you. Add that to your rotation, man. A daily college basketball show. I mean, just put that right in line at number 2, right behind Locked On Hoosiers. All right, so be sure that you go and check that out. And speaking of college basketball, newest AP poll came out for college basketball, and your Indiana Hoosiers found themselves bumped up just a little bit. They moved up from 17 up to 16. The Hoosiers are 2-0, the 16th ranked team in college basketball. And man, if there's one thing we've learned through the first week and a half, I guess, of college basketball, through the first 2 games that everybody has played, it's going to be a wild season. It's going to be insane because there's so many good teams, but yet there's so many good mid-majors that everybody's records are going to be blemished. Like, there will not be any undefeateds, which I know that doesn't happen very often, but even those 2 and 3 and 4 loss teams, I just don't think they're going to exist. I really don't. I just don't think you're going to see many of those teams who only have less than a finger or less than a hand of losses, right? I mean, you're going to see teams that have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 losses on their resume, but are still going to be really, really good college basketball teams. And I think Indiana could be in that boat as well, especially if we don't figure it out and can't start playing for 40 minutes, right? And that starts this weekend with South Carolina on Saturday. That's a Gamecocks team that is still extremely talented, but yeah, they've slipped up already, right? They slipped up and let North Florida beat them in the opener 74-71, but don't be fooled. Okay, don't be fooled. That's a North Florida team. They're 3-0. Not only did they beat South Carolina, they beat Georgia Tech too. Why? Because they can, and they're just good. And that's what I'm talking about. College basketball has gotten scary good at every single level. So all these teams that we talk about on Indiana's schedule, right, away from South Carolina. I know we've talked about how Indiana's non-conference schedule is not all that good with teams like UNC Greensboro and Sam Houston and Chattanooga and Winthrop and teams like that. But that just shows you cannot mess around. You cannot overlook them. You have to prepare for them like you would Purdue, Michigan, or Ohio State. You have to play those teams like it's your Super Bowl, like it's your national championship game. Because if you don't, they're good enough to beat you. And they will. They'll walk right into Assembly Hall and they'll do it to you. And they don't care. They don't worry about it. They believe that they can do it. And so for Indiana, you've got South Carolina coming up this weekend. It's a mid-afternoon game. Of course, it's on Peacock, so good luck to all of those people trying to watch it this weekend. Pretty simple. Indiana plays their game, they're going to win. We'll talk about it later in the week, but Indiana has to be feeling pretty good about themselves coming off a nice win over Eastern Illinois. You have South Carolina, then you have UNC Greensboro before you then take on a Louisville team in the battle for Atlantis. That's a Louisville team where you've got a little film on them now because they went up against Tennessee, who beat them by double digits. Remember, that's a Tennessee team that Indiana beat in that exhibition the other day in Knoxville, right there at Thompson Bowling Arena. So you feel pretty good about your first game in Atlantis. And if you remember, I've put a lot of stake on this battle for Atlantis. I said Indiana is good enough to win it. I predicted that we probably wouldn't, but we're good enough to do it. And I think we should. I think we should win it, but that doesn't mean that we will. But I think you feel pretty good about the opener in that one against Louisville. And then the Hoosiers will wrap up non-conference play. Sam Houston, Miami of Ohio, 2 Big Ten games squeezed in there. Remember, Minnesota on December 9th, Nebraska on December 13th. You then have Chattanooga and Winthrop as well. And look, Indiana played pretty good in their first 2 games, have a lot to work on, a lot to improve. If you play 40 minutes, there's not going to be many teams that can hang with you. It's pretty simple because you saw in the second half of, I think, both games how good this team can be when they push the basketball, when they shoot effectively, when they get it inside, when they force turnovers, when they just play to their strengths. This is a really good basketball team. But when they play lazy, when they're unmotivated, have low energy, you're going to get beat somewhere, and it's going to be embarrassing if you don't. So that's a shout out to the team. It's a shout out to Mike Woodson. Get them ready to go, and that starts with South Carolina this Saturday. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers. Thank you so much for being here again. For all of those of you on the audio platform, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, you name it, I appreciate you. Be sure you're following us on there and have those notifications turned on so you never miss new episodes. We're Monday through Friday on this podcast, but we have special episodes on the weekends too, so you don't want to miss that. And then for those of you on YouTube, like the video, comment down below your thoughts on today's episode, and then be sure you subscribe if you have not already. All right. We're back tomorrow, Hoosier fans. So until then, stay safe. I'll talk to you later.